the earth-shattering rumble that tore through Parowan, Utah. On that sweltering July afternoon in 1876, stole not only the breath from Clara Foster's lungs, but threatened to steal the only family she had left in this world. She stood frozen at the mouth of the Iron Mountain mine, dust billowing out like the breath of some awakened beast, as men shouted and scrambled around her. Her brother Daniel, barely 20, had gone into that mountain just hours before, taking their father's place when he fell ill with fever. The south tunnel collapsed. Someone shouted through the chaos. "There's at least 6 men trapped inside." Clara's heart stopped. Daniel worked the south tunnel. "My brother," she gasped, grasping the sleeve of a passing miner. "Daniel Foster, he's in there. Please, you have to get him out." The man's soot-darkened face crumpled with sympathy and dread. "Miss Foster, we're doing everything we can, but it's bad. Real bad." As the afternoon wore into evening, rescue efforts moved with agonizing slowness. Every minute that passed was another minute her brother might be losing air beneath tons of rock and soil. Clara paced at the perimeter where they'd forced family members to wait, her hands raw from wringing. "They're saying it's too dangerous," Martha Wilson, another miner's wife, whispered beside her. "The supports are compromised. They might have to wait until morning." "When morning?" Clara's voice broke. "They'll suffocate by then." It was then that the crowd parted, and a tall figure on horseback approached the mine superintendent, who stood directing the faltering rescue effort. The stranger dismounted with fluid grace that spoke of a lifetime spent in the saddle. Even from a distance, Clara could see the dust of the trail coating his clothes, the wide-brimmed hat that shaded eyes that seemed to assess the situation with unnerving calm. "I heard there was trouble," the man said, his voice carrying across the anxious crowd. "I've worked cave-ins before, up in the silver mines near Virginia City." The superintendent looked skeptical. "And you are Archer Young." He removed his hat, revealing dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. "I've got experience with timber shoring in unstable tunnels." Clara pushed forward through the crowd. "Please," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "My brother is in there. They're saying they might wait until morning." But Archer Young's eyes met hers and something in his expression shifted. "No man left in the dark," he said simply, turning back to the superintendent. "Get me your best men and all the timber you've got. We're going in now." What followed was a blur of activity as the cowboy, for that's what he clearly was, from his worn boots to the way he carried himself, organized the reluctant rescue crew with calm authority. Clara watched as he stripped off his coat and vest, revealing a faded blue shirt with rolled-up sleeves that showed arms corded with muscle. "Miss, you should wait back with the others," he told her when he caught her hovering near the mine entrance. "I can't just stand there," Clara replied, lifting her chin. "I can carry water, hold lanterns, whatever you need." Archer studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Stay behind me, and if I say run, you run. No questions." As dusk fell over the mountains, they ventured into the mine's main shaft. The air grew dense, and Clara's lantern cast eerie shadows along the rough-hewn walls. The deeper they went, the more they encountered evidence of the collapse: splintered support beams, debris, and an ominous groaning from the mountain itself. When they reached the blockage, Clara's heart sank. A massive pile of rock and dirt sealed the tunnel completely. "Daniel," she called, her voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "Daniel, can you hear me?" Silence answered her, but Archer pressed his ear against a section of the rubble, closing his eyes in concentration. After a long moment, he looked up at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "There's air moving through here," he said. "And I think I heard something. They might still be alive." Hope surged through Clara as Archer began directing the rescue team to carefully remove debris while simultaneously building new supports. His hands moved with practiced precision, never wasting a motion as he worked. Hour after hour passed, the men taking turns digging while others shored up the increasingly unstable passage. "The whole mountain could come down on our heads," one miner muttered after a particularly ominous groan from above. "Then we work faster," Archer replied without looking up. It was well past midnight when Clara, ferrying water back from the entrance, stumbled with exhaustion. Archer caught her elbow, steadying her. "You need rest," he said, his voice low and rough from the dust. "So do you," she countered, noticing the lines of fatigue etched on his face. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I made a promise to get your brother out. I aim to keep it." Clara studied him in the lantern light. "Why? You don't know us. You could have ridden right past Parowan." Archer's eyes, despite the exhaustion in them, held something that made her breath catch. "Some things a man just does because they need doing, Miss Foster." He returned to work, and Clara felt something shift inside her, a feeling so unexpected in the midst of terror that she hardly recognized it. This stranger, this cowboy who'd appeared like something from a dime novel, was fighting the mountain itself to save her brother. Near dawn, when even the strongest men were swaying with exhaustion, Archer's pickaxe broke through the final barrier. A rush of stale air flowed out, and then, miracle of miracles, a weak voice called back. "Hello? Is someone there?" "Daniel," Clara cried, pushing forward. "Daniel, it's Clara." What followed was a frenzy of activity as they widened the opening and discovered the trapped miners huddled in a small pocket where the tunnel supports had partially held. Daniel was alive, though injured with a broken leg and countless cuts. He was the first one they passed through the narrow opening, directly into his sister's waiting arms. "You came for me," Daniel murmured, his face gray with dust and pain. "I didn't," Clara admitted, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. "He did." She nodded toward Archer, who was helping extract another miner from the rubble. As the rescued men were carried to the surface in the pale light of dawn, the mountain gave another ominous groan. Archer, the last one still inside besides Clara, looked up sharply. "Run," he said simply. Clara froze, watching in horror as cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling. Archer lunged toward her, throwing his body over hers as the world dissolved into noise and darkness. She couldn't have been unconscious for more than moments. When Clara opened her eyes, she was pinned beneath Archer's weight, his body having shielded her from the worst of the collapse. The lantern, miraculously still lit, lay on its side several feet away, casting ghostly shadows. "Mr. Young," she whispered, fear clutching her heart. "Archer." He stirred with a groan, shifting his weight off her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "No, I don't think so." Clara assessed herself quickly. Archer winced as he tried to move. "Nothing permanent." They were in a small pocket of space, the tunnel behind them completely blocked with fresh debris. The way ahead seemed mostly intact, though dust still swirled in the lantern light. "We need to move," Archer said, struggling to his feet and helping Clara up. "That won't hold for long." They made their way forward, Archer limping slightly, Clara holding the lantern high. The rescue party had cleared most obstacles during their inward journey, but now sections had collapsed anew, requiring them to climb over rubble and squeeze through narrow gaps. All the while, the mountain continued its ominous symphony of creaks and groans. When they finally emerged into the light of early morning, a cheer went up from the crowd still gathered at the mine entrance. Daniel, his leg splinted and being tended by the town doctor, called out to his sister with relief etched on his face. Clara turned to thank Archer, but the cowboy had already slipped away from the crowd's attention. making his way toward his horse tethered at the edge of the clearing. She hurried after him. "You're leaving?" she asked, reaching him as he checked his saddle cinch. "You're hurt. You should let the doctor see you." Archer shook his head. "Doctor's got his hands full with men who need him more." "At least come to our house," Clara pressed. "I can tend to your injuries, give you a proper meal. It's the least I can do after what you did for Daniel. For all of us." He hesitated, looking past her to where the rescued miners were being reunited with their families. Something in his expression softened. "One meal," he conceded. "Then I'll be on my way." One meal turned into supper and breakfast the next morning. Archer had intended to leave Parowan behind, continue his solitary journey to California. Instead, he found himself repairing the Fosters' sagging front porch while Daniel rested inside, his broken leg elevated on pillows. Clara moved about the small kitchen, the scent of baking bread filling the modest cabin. "You've got a knack for that," she observed, watching him replace a rotted support beam with practiced ease. Archer shrugged. "Did a bit of everything over the years. Mining, ranching, carpentry when there was work to be had." "And where exactly were you headed before our mine decided to cave in?" Clara asked, wiping her hands on her apron as she settled on the porch steps beside him. He was quiet for a long moment. "California, maybe, Oregon, somewhere new, running to something or away from it." Her directness surprised him. "Both, maybe." He didn't elaborate and she didn't press. That evening, as they sat around the table with Daniel, the young man raised his cup in a toast. "To our very own guardian angel, though you look more like a gunslinger than anything with wings." Archer's lips quirked in a half-smile. "No angel and no gunslinger either. Just a man passing through." "Well, passing through or not, you've got a place here as long as you want it," Daniel said earnestly. "I can't work the mine with this leg, and we've got that back field that hasn't been planted in 2 seasons. Clara's eyes met Archer's across the table, and he saw something there, hope, perhaps, or something deeper that made his chest tighten in a way he hadn't felt in years. "I could stay on a while," he found himself saying, "until you're back on your feet." 3 weeks later, Archer was still in Parowan. The days fell into a rhythm tending to the neglected fields behind the Foster property, helping Clara with repairs to the cabin, sharing meals where conversation came easier each day. In the evenings, he sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, listening to Clara read aloud from one of her cherished books while Daniel whittled by lantern light. It was a peace he hadn't known he was seeking, in a place he'd never intended to stay. One afternoon, as he mended a fence at the edge of the property, Clara brought him water, her cheeks flushed from the kitchen heat. "The Ladies' Aid Society is hosting a social on Saturday," she said, watching him drink. "There'll be dancing." Archer handed the cup back to her. "I don't dance much. Everyone dances at the social. It's practically a town ordinance." Her smile teased at something in him. "Besides, you can't hide away at our place forever. People are starting to talk." "About what?" "About the mysterious cowboy who saved half a dozen men and then disappeared into the Foster cabin." She tilted her head. "They're curious about you." "Not much to be curious about," he said, turning back to the fence. Clara stood her ground. "I don't believe that for a minute, Archer Young." When he looked at her again, something in her expression made his carefully constructed defenses waver. She wasn't just pretty, though she was that, with her honey-brown hair and eyes that changed from gray to blue depending on the light, but there was a strength in her that called to him. A resilience that had kept her and her brother going after losing both parents, that had her standing at a mine entrance refusing to give up hope when wiser heads had counseled preparing for the worst. "One dance," he said finally. "But I'm warning you, I've got 2 left feet." Saturday evening found Archer uncomfortably clean-shaven and wearing his one good shirt, escorting Clara and Daniel, who insisted on attending despite his crutches, to the church hall where lanterns hung from the rafters and a small band of local musicians tuned their instruments. The entire town seemed to be there, and Archer felt the weight of curious glances as they entered. Clara, seeming to sense his discomfort, kept close to his side, introducing him to townspeople with a warmth that gradually eased the tightness in his shoulders. "So you're the hero we've been hearing about," Mrs. Patterson, the baker's wife, said, eyeing him appreciatively. "Clara, you've been keeping him all to yourself. Shame on you." "Mr. Young has been helping us get back on our feet," Clara replied smoothly. "We're fortunate he decided to stay for a while." "Indeed," Mrs. Patterson agreed with a knowing smile that made Archer shift uncomfortably. "Very fortunate." As the music started, Clara turned to him with expectant eyes. "I believe you promised me a dance, Mr. Young." He wanted to refuse, to retreat to the safety of the shadows along the wall, but her hand was already in his, drawing him toward the center of the room where other couples were forming lines for a reel. "Just follow my lead," she murmured, positioning them in the dance. "And try not to trample me entirely." To his surprise, the steps came back to him more easily than he'd expected. Memories of similar gatherings years ago, before the war, before everything changed. Clara moved with a natural grace, her skirts swirling around her ankles, her laughter rising above the music when he occasionally misstepped. One dance became two, then three, until Archer lost count. They paused only for refreshments, joining Daniel, who sat with a group of young miners, regaling them with an increasingly dramatic retelling of his rescue. "He's leaving out the part where he fainted when they pulled him out," Clara whispered to Archer, her eyes dancing with mirth. "I heard that," Daniel called, throwing a napkin at his sister. "And I did not faint. I was overcome with gratitude." "Face first into the dirt," she replied, laughing. As the evening wore on, the band shifted to slower melodies. When Clara led Archer back to the dance floor, the mood had changed. He placed his hand at her waist, keeping a respectable distance between them as they began to waltz. "You lied about having two left feet," she said quietly. "Maybe I just needed the right partner." Her eyes met his, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the current that had been building since that first night in the mine. Archer pulled her slightly closer. "Propriety be damned. People are watching," she murmured, though she made no move to increase the distance. "Let them," he replied, surprising himself with his boldness. As they moved across the floor, the music weaving around them like an enchantment, Archer felt the walls he'd built around himself beginning to crumble. This woman, this town, they were becoming dangerous to him. They made him want things he'd sworn he could live without. Later, walking home under a canopy of stars, Daniel hobbled ahead, leaving them to follow at a slower pace. The night air was cool after the warmth of the dance hall, and Clara wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "You've been in Parowan almost a month now," she said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Still thinking of California?" The question hung in the air between them. Archer looked up at the vast spread of stars, so much brighter here than in the cities he'd passed through. "Not as much as I was," he admitted. Clara's hand found his in the darkness, her fingers cool against his palm. "Good," she said simply. That night, lying on the cot in the small room the Fosters had given him, Archer stared at the ceiling and contemplated the crossroads before him. Stay and risk everything: his freedom, his heart, the careful isolation he'd cultivated since the war, or leave now, before he was in too deep. The decision was made for him the next morning when Sheriff Mills arrived at the Foster cabin during breakfast, his expression grim. "Archer Young." he asked, standing in the doorway, hand resting significantly on the gun at his hip. Archer set down his coffee cup slowly. "That's me. I've got a telegram here from Wyoming Territory." The sheriff pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket. "Says there's a man matching your description wanted for questioning in connection with a bank robbery in Cheyenne 3 years back." Clara gasped, her eyes flying to Archer's face. Daniel half rose from his chair, wincing as his splinted leg bumped the table. "There's been a mistake," Clara said firmly. "It's all right, Clara," Archer interrupted, his voice steady despite the coldness spreading through his chest. "Sheriff, I've never been to Cheyenne, never robbed a bank anywhere. I fought for the Union, worked honest jobs since." Sheriff Mills studied him. "Telegram doesn't say you did it, just that they want to talk to you. Says you were identified by a witness who saw you near the bank that day." "A lot of men look like me," Archer replied. "Tall, dark hair, riding a bay horse." "That describes half the drifters in the territories." The sheriff nodded slowly. "That's true enough. I've wired back asking for more details." His eyes softened slightly. "Everyone in this town knows what you did at that mine. I'm not looking to haul off a hero without good cause. But I'll need you to stay put until I get a reply." After the sheriff left, the kitchen fell into tense silence. Archer couldn't bring himself to look at Clara or Daniel, shame burning in his gut not for any crime committed, but for the deception of omission he'd maintained. "Archer." Clara's voice was tight with emotion. "Look at me." He raised his eyes reluctantly. "Did you do it?" she asked directly. "No." The word came without hesitation. "But I wasn't completely honest with you either." He took a deep breath. "My name is Archer Young, that's true enough. I did fight for the Union. But after the war, I drifted. Did things I'm not proud of. Never robbery or murder, but I ran with men who weren't always on the right side of the law." Daniel leaned forward. "What kind of things?" "Cattle running across borders without proper papers. Some gambling operations. I was a guard for a saloon in Dodge City for a while." Archer rubbed a hand across his face. "I've been trying to outrun that life for 2 years now, heading west for a fresh start." Clara's expression was unreadable. "And Parowan. Was that just a convenient stop on your way to somewhere else?" The hurt in her voice cut deeper than he'd expected. "It started that way," he admitted, "but it's become more. You've become more." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I thought I knew you." "You do know me, Clara. Better than anyone has in a long time." He reached across the table, but she withdrew her hands to her lap. "The man I am now, the man who dug through that mountain for your brother, that's the real me. The rest is just shadows I've been trying to leave behind." For 3 days, Archer lived in a purgatory of waiting. He continued working the Foster fields, repairing what needed fixing, but a distance had fallen between him and Clara that felt wider than any mountain. She was unfailingly polite, but the easy companionship they'd shared was gone, replaced by careful courtesy that wounded him more than anger would have. On the 4th day, Sheriff Mills returned, this time with a smile. "Got the reply from Wyoming," he announced without preamble. The witness recanted his statement. "Says he was pressured by another man to identify someone. You're in the clear, Young." Relief washed through Archer, but it was tempered by the knowledge that the damage to Clara's trust might be irreparable. That evening he found her sitting alone on the porch swing, watching the sunset. "May I join you?" he asked, standing at the steps. She nodded, making room on the swing. They sat in silence for several minutes, the gentle creaking of the chains the only sound. "I'm leaving tomorrow," Archer finally said. Clara's breath caught, but she didn't look at him. "The sheriff cleared your name. You don't have to go." "I think I do." He stared out at the darkening mountains. "I've caused enough disruption in your life." Is that what you think you are? A disruption. Now she turned to him, anger flashing in her eyes. My brother would be dead if not for you. This farm would still be falling apart. I'd still be, she stopped abruptly. You'd still be what? Clara looked away. I'd still be just existing, not living. Before you came, it was just work and worry day after day. Her voice softened. You made me remember there's more to life than just surviving it. Archer's heart thundered in his chest. Clara, I'm not the man you think I am. I never thought you were perfect, Archer. None of us are. She reached for his hand, and this time he was the one who hesitated. I was hurt that you didn't trust me enough to tell me about your past, but I understand why you didn't. Do you? He asked quietly. You were afraid, she said simply. Afraid I'd see you differently. Afraid I wouldn't want you anymore. The truth of her words struck him like a physical blow. And do you want me? Clara's answer was to lean forward and press her lips to his, a kiss so gentle it almost broke him. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining with a certainty that chased away the shadows that had haunted him. Stay, she whispered. Not for Daniel or the farm or even for me if you're not ready. Stay for yourself, for the man you want to be. Archer raised a hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. I don't deserve this chance. None of us get what we deserve in this life, she replied. We get what we're brave enough to reach for. He kissed her then, properly this time, drawing her close as the last light faded from the sky and the first stars appeared above the mountains that had brought them together. The following months transformed the Foster homestead. Under Archer's care, fields that had lain fallow for seasons now sprouted with corn and wheat. The barn roof was mended, the chicken coop expanded, the house itself reinforced against the coming winter. Daniel, his leg finally healed, returned to limited work at the mine, though he spent more time helping with the farm than he had before. Word of Archer's skill with horses spread through Parowan, and soon he was supplementing their income by training local farmers' mounts and even breaking wild mustangs that ranchers brought from the surrounding hills. What had begun as a temporary refuge became, day by day, the home he'd never dared to hope for in town. Initial suspicion about the mysterious cowboy gave way to acceptance, then respect. He joined the volunteer fire brigade, taught the schoolchildren about tracking and wilderness survival, and even reluctantly accepted a position on the Harvest Festival Committee at Clara's insistence. You're becoming downright respectable, she teased one evening as they walked home from a town meeting, their hands intertwined. A terrifying prospect, he replied with a smile that reached his eyes, something that happened with increasing frequency these days. Absolutely horrifying, she agreed. Next thing you know, you'll be running for mayor. Archer laughed outright at that. Not a chance. I'll leave politics to men who enjoy arguing. They reached the fork in the path where the road to the Foster farm branched off from the main road. Clara paused, looking up at the stars that seemed to hang just out of reach above the valley. I've been thinking, she said, her voice taking on a quality that made Archer pay close attention. A dangerous pastime, he quipped. She nudged him with her shoulder. Be serious for a moment. I've been thinking about us, about the future. Archer's pulse quickened. In the 6 months since he'd decided to stay, they had grown ever closer, their courtship conducted under Daniel's amused but watchful eye and the approving supervision of the town's more conservative elements. They had kissed more than kissed, if he was honest, in the shadows of the barn and in the quiet moments they could steal alone. But they had not spoken explicitly of what might come next. What about the future? He asked, his throat suddenly dry. Clara turned to face him fully, moonlight silvering her features. People are starting to talk. People always talk. It's the chief export of Parowan. They're saying it isn't proper, you living with us without certain commitments being made. She lifted her chin. And while I generally couldn't care less what Mrs. Patterson and her sewing circle think, in this case, they might have a point. Archer's heart seemed to stop, then restart at double pace. Clara Foster, are you proposing to me? Don't be ridiculous, she scoffed, though her cheeks colored visibly even in the moonlight. I'm merely suggesting that if you were planning to propose, I wouldn't be opposed to hearing what you might have to say on the matter. He couldn't help it, he laughed, pulling her into his arms despite her indignant squeak. You are the most forward woman I've ever met. Is that a complaint? She asked against his chest. It's the highest compliment I know how to give. He tilted her face up to his. I've been carrying my mother's ring in my pocket for 2 months, trying to find the perfect moment to ask you. Clara's eyes widened. 2 months, and you've said nothing? I wanted it to be perfect. He shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. You deserve perfect. Perfect is overrated, she said, her voice soft with emotion. I'd rather have real. Archer released her just long enough to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small gold band with a modest pearl set between 2 tiny diamonds. It had been one of the few things he'd kept from his life before the war, carried through battlefields and long years of drifting, a talisman of a happier time. Clara Foster, he said, his voice rough with feeling as he knelt on the dirt path. You found me when I didn't even know I was lost. You gave me a home when I'd forgotten what that word meant. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Her answer was to pull him to his feet and kiss him with a fervor that left no doubt about her response. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, she held out her trembling left hand. Is that a yes? He asked, suddenly unsure despite her enthusiasm. That's what took you so long, she replied, laughing through tears. Yes, Archer Young, 1,000 times yes. The ring slid onto her finger as if it had been made for her, the pearl glowing softly in the moonlight. Daniel knows, doesn't he? She asked as they resumed their walk home, her hand clutching his arm as if she might float away without his anchor. Of course he does. I asked his permission weeks ago. Clara stopped again. You asked my little brother for my hand. I'm going to kill him for keeping this secret. He wanted to, Archer assured her, tugging her forward. But I convinced him you'd never forgive either of us if he spoiled the surprise. When they reached the farmhouse, Daniel was waiting on the porch, a knowing grin spreading across his face as they approached. Finally worked up the courage, did he? He called. Clara ran ahead, taking the porch steps in one bound to throw her arms around her brother. You impossible man, keeping secrets from me, Daniel laughed, spinning her around despite his still tender leg. Some secrets are worth keeping, big sister. He set her down, extending his hand to Archer as he climbed the steps. Welcome to the family officially. Thank you, Archer said, his voice thick with emotion. For everything. Daniel clapped him on the shoulder. Just keep making her happy, that's all the thanks I need. They were married in the Parowan church on a crisp October day, with leaves the color of fire drifting down around the building. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered by the same ladies who had once gossiped about her relationship with the mysterious cowboy. Daniel gave her away, his limp barely noticeable as he walked her down the aisle to where Archer waited, scarcely able to believe his good fortune. The entire town turned out for the celebration that followed, a harvest feast that spilled from the church hall into the street, as the community embraced the union of the Foster girl and her heroic cowboy. Even Sheriff Mills raised a toast, referencing the telegram scare with good humor that brought laughter from the crowd. As evening fell and lanterns were lit for dancing, Archer led his bride in their first waltz as husband and wife, his earlier awkwardness replaced by the confidence of a man who had finally found his place in the world. Mrs. Young, he murmured against her ear as they moved across the floor. I believe that's the most beautiful name I've ever heard. Clara laughed, the sound like music. I'm still getting used to it myself. We have a lifetime for you to practice, he replied, drawing her closer than propriety strictly allowed, but no one seemed inclined to object. They had earned this happiness, this moment of perfect joy. Later that night, after they had been escorted to the small cabin, Archer had spent the summer building at the far edge of the Foster property, close enough for convenience, but far enough for privacy. They stood on their own porch, looking up at stars that seemed to have been scattered across the sky just for them. "Are you happy?" Clara asked, nestled against his chest. "More than I knew was possible," Archer replied honestly. "Are you?" She turned in his arms, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "I have everything I ever wanted and things I never even knew to wish for." Her smile held a hint of mischief. "But I could be happier." "Is that so, Mrs. Young?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Indeed it is, Mr. Young." She took his hand, leading him toward the door of their new home. "And I believe it's your husbandly duty to see to my happiness." "Well, when you put it that way," Archer laughed, sweeping her into his arms and carrying her across the threshold, "I suppose I have no choice but to oblige." The door closed behind them, shutting out the world as they began the first night of their new life together. Spring came to Parowan in a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. The young Foster farm, as locals had taken to calling it, flourished under the combined efforts of the three who worked its fertile soil. Daniel had built himself a small cabin near the main house, giving the newlyweds their privacy while maintaining the family bond that had sustained them all. Clara stood in the doorway of their cabin, watching Archer and Daniel working side by side to mend a section of fence damaged in the winter storms. Her hand rested unconsciously on the gentle swell of her belly, still small enough to be hidden beneath her apron, but growing more noticeable each day. She hadn't told Archer yet. The discovery was still new, confirmed by Doc Wilson just 2 days ago after weeks of suspicion. She wanted the moment to be special when she shared the news that would change their lives once again. That evening, as Archer returned from the fields, Clara met him with a basin of warm water and a kiss that lingered longer than their usual greeting. "What's the occasion?" he asked, sinking gratefully onto the bench outside their door to remove his muddy boots. "Does there need to be an occasion for a wife to welcome her husband home?" she countered, helping him roll up his sleeves to wash the day's dirt from his arms and face. Archer studied her face, his eyes narrowing slightly. "You're up to something, Clara Young. I can tell by that look." "What look?" she asked innocently. "That one right there, the one that says you've got a secret you're just bursting to tell." He caught her hands, pulling her gently onto his lap despite her half-hearted protest. "Out with it." Clara's heart raced. This wasn't how she'd planned to tell him. Mud spattered on their doorstep with the dinner still cooking inside. She'd imagined a quiet moment by the fire, perhaps, or a Sunday walk to their favorite spot by the creek. But looking into his eyes, patient and filled with love, she couldn't hold back the words any longer. "We're going to have a baby," she said softly. "In the fall, around harvest time." Archer went perfectly still, his expression frozen somewhere between shock and wonder. For a terrible moment, Clara feared she'd misjudged his readiness for fatherhood. Then his arms tightened around her, and she felt a tremor go through his body. "A baby," he repeated, his voice hoarse. "Our baby," Clara nodded, tears welling in her eyes at the raw emotion in his face. "Are you happy?" In answer, Archer stood suddenly, lifting her in his arms and spinning her in a circle that made her shriek with surprise and delight. "Archer Young, put me down this instant," she laughed, clutching his shoulders. Not a chance, he replied, his face alight with joy as he continued to twirl her. My wife is giving me a child. I'm going to shout it from the rooftops. You most certainly are not, she protested, though her heart swelled at his enthusiasm. At least let me tell Daniel first. Archer set her carefully on her feet, keeping his arms around her as if she might float away. A father, he said wonderingly. I never thought I'd live to see the day. Clara rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. You're going to be wonderful at it. I don't know the first thing about being a father, he admitted, a note of uncertainty creeping into his voice. My own wasn't exactly a shining example. You know how to love, Clara said simply. Everything else we'll figure out together. That night, after sharing their news with an ecstatic Daniel, they lay in bed, Archer's hand spanning Clara's still flat abdomen as if he could already feel the tiny life growing there. Boy or girl? He asked sleepily. Clara was drifting toward dreams herself. Do you think it's a boy or a girl? She smiled in the darkness. I don't know. Does it matter to you? Archer was quiet for so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. Finally, he said, a girl, I think, with your spirit and your eyes. And your stubbornness, Clara added. Heaven help us if that's the case, he chuckled, pulling her closer. Poor child won't stand a chance with both of us for parents. As summer ripened into fall, so did Clara, her body rounding with the promise of new life. The harvest that year was bountiful, as if the land itself was celebrating their good fortune. Archer insisted she rest more, taking on extra work himself and hiring one of the neighbor boys to help with tasks Clara usually managed. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, she protested one afternoon when he found her attempting to gather eggs from the henhouse. Humor me, he replied, gently taking the basket from her hands. It gives me peace of mind. She relented, partly because the advancing pregnancy did tire her more than she cared to admit, and partly because she loved watching him prepare so earnestly for fatherhood, building a cradle with his own hands, reading childcare books ordered from Salt Lake City, expanding their cabin to include a small nursery. On a cool November evening with the scent of snow in the air, Clara's labor began. Archer sent Daniel galloping for the midwife and doctor, then returned to find his wife pacing their bedroom, her face set in determined lines. They're coming, he assured her, trying to mask his own anxiety. Is there anything I can do? Clara smiled through a grimace as another contraction tightened around her. Just stay with me. That's all I need. The labor lasted through the night and into the following day, longer than anyone had expected for a first child. Archer remained at Clara's side despite the midwife's attempts to banish him to wait with Daniel. He wiped her brow, held her hands as she pushed, whispered encouragement when her strength began to flag. I can't, she gasped after particularly brutal hours, tears streaming down her face. Archer, I can't do this. You can, he said firmly, his face close to hers. You're the strongest person I know, Clara Young. Our child is counting on that strength. I'm counting on it. She rallied, finding reserves of determination that amazed even the experienced midwife. And finally, as the afternoon sun broke through clouds to cast golden light through the bedroom window, a lusty cry filled the room. A boy. The midwife announced triumphantly, holding up the red-faced, squalling infant, and a fine one at that. Archer stared in wonder as the tiny being, still slick with birth and impossibly small, was cleaned and wrapped before being placed in Clara's trembling arms. Hello, little one, she whispered, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten as she traced a finger over the perfect bow of his lips, the miniature fingernails, the wisps of dark hair that suggested he might favor his father. We've been waiting for you. Archer perched carefully on the edge of the bed, afraid to disturb the miraculous tableau before him. When Clara looked up at him, her face radiant despite the shadows of fatigue beneath her eyes, something shifted in his chest, a final piece of his heart that he hadn't known was missing locked into place. "Would you like to hold your son?" she asked softly. His hands, which had broken wild horses and dug through a mountain, suddenly felt too large, too clumsy for such a delicate task. But Clara was already transferring the bundle to his arms, showing him how to support the baby's head. The child's eyes, unfocused and dark blue, seemed to look directly into his soul. Archer felt tears spill down his cheeks, unchecked and unashamed. "What shall we call him?" Clara asked, watching the two most important people in her world meet for the first time. Archer considered the tiny face before him. "What about James, after your father?" Clara's eyes filled with fresh tears. "James Daniel Young," she said, trying the name aloud. "It's perfect." Later, when Clara had fallen into an exhausted sleep and the baby was settled in his cradle, Archer stepped onto the porch where Daniel waited anxiously. "You have a nephew," he announced, his voice still rough with emotion. "James Daniel Young, 7 pounds if the doctor's guess is right, and apparently blessed with a set of lungs that could wake the dead." Daniel's face split in a wide grin. "James Daniel, you named him after me." "After both of you," Archer corrected. "The two best men I know." Daniel embraced him then, a rare display of physical affection between the men. "Congratulations, brother," he said. "How's Clara?" "Exhausted but well. The doctor says she came through it better than most." Pride swelled in Archer's chest. "She was magnificent, Daniel." "I've never seen such courage." They stood together in companionable silence, looking out over the land that had become home, the place where young James would grow and thrive surrounded by love, and the legacy they were building together. "Life's funny, isn't it?" Daniel mused. "If that mine hadn't collapsed, if you hadn't been riding by that day. If you hadn't been stubborn enough to go to work with a broken leg," Archer added with a wry smile. Daniel laughed. "Exactly. All these little chances that seemed like disasters at the time, leading to this moment." He clapped a hand on Archer's shoulder. "The best disasters of our lives." Archer nodded, thinking of all the twists and turns that had brought him to Parowan, to Clara, to fatherhood. "The very best," he agreed. The years passed in the rhythm of seasons: spring planting, summer growth, fall harvest, winter rest. James grew from a colicky infant to a sturdy toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's inquisitive nature. At 3, he was joined by a sister, Elizabeth Rose, who arrived with considerably less drama than her brother but twice the determination. The young Foster farm prospered, expanding to include more acreage as neighboring properties came up for sale. Daniel, to everyone's surprise including his own, fell in love with and married the new schoolteacher, a spirited young woman from Boston who had come west seeking adventure. They built their own home on the property, creating a family compound that buzzed with activity and laughter. Archer, who had once measured his worth by the distance he could travel in a day, now found fulfillment in the roots he'd put down in this valley. The nightmares that had once plagued him, echoes of war and harder times, faded to rare occurrences. In their place came dreams of watching his children grow, of growing old beside Clara, of building something that would outlast them all. On the 10th anniversary of the mine collapse, Archer and Clara walked hand in hand to the cemetery, where a monument had been erected to honor those who had died that day and celebrate those who had been saved. James and Elizabeth ran ahead, playing a game of tag among the gravestones despite their mother's admonishments to show respect. 10 years, Clara mused, leaning against Archer's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times it seems like another lifetime entirely. Archer nodded, watching their children dart between the markers. At 8, James was already showing signs of the man he would become: thoughtful, deliberate, with a quiet strength that reminded Archer of Daniel. 5-year-old Elizabeth was all fire and motion, curious about everything, afraid of nothing. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I just kept riding that day?" he asked. Clara squeezed his hand. "I try not to think about it." "The idea of a life without you, without them," she nodded toward their children. "It's unimaginable now." "For me too," he admitted. "Yet it was such a near thing, if I'd been an hour earlier or later on the trail." "But you weren't," she said firmly. "You were exactly where you needed to be, exactly when you were meant to be there." She turned to face him, her eyes as bright and clear as the day he'd first seen her at the mine entrance. "Some might call it coincidence. I call it fate." Archer had never been a man who believed in predestination or divine intervention. He'd seen too much random cruelty in the world to trust in a grand design. But looking at his family, at the life they'd built together from the rubble of what might have been tragedy, he found himself reconsidering. "Maybe you're right," he conceded, pulling her close for a kiss that still held all the sweetness of their first. "Maybe some things are just meant to be." As they walked home in the golden light of late afternoon, their children running ahead and their future stretching before them like the open valley, Archer Young felt a contentment so deep it bordered on reverence. From the darkest moment, a mountain coming down around them, had come his greatest light. The mine had collapsed with her brother inside, and he had dug all night to bring him out. In doing so, he had unearthed not just a man's life, but his own salvation, buried beneath years of wandering. Clara had been right that night on the porch swing so many years ago. None of us get what we deserve in this life. We get what we're brave enough to reach for. And Archer, for once, had been brave enough to reach for everything.